Hey guys, it's Mrs. Severson, and welcome to your video lesson on the culture of and politics of the Roaring Twenties. Today I'm going to take you through about 7 different subtopics under this culture of the 20s. So it's directly related to the new inventions and the new ways of hiring and keeping new employees, but it's kind of just a little bit of an offshoot in terms of subject matter. So I do want to treat this as a little bit of a separate subject, but just remember that we're still talking about the 1920s, and a lot of the new inventions that we already talked about kind of perpetuated these cultural changes. So they kind of interrelate. The one thing that I did want to let you guys know, this is a video lesson, so please feel free to pause at any time. If I'm speaking too fast or you didn't catch something, go ahead and rewind. And obviously, as you're taking notes, you'll need to slow it down. So really, this is at your own pace, so treat it as such. So the first topic I'm going to go over is talking about nativism. So first of all, just to define that for you, nativism is the idea that one's own country, so in this example, America, would need to be protected from immigrants or people coming into the country that were not native to it. So the reason that this happened and that this is our first topic is because all the new inventions that we had and the great high wages and things for some of the people in the 1920s kind of began this influx or massive migration to America from other countries, particularly places that were having a hard time after World War One. So we had a lot of these immigration issues becoming a huge problem in this time. The other issue, obviously, we talked about the farm crisis in our last unit. That was becoming even more of an issue for a lot of Americans. So those issues led to the rise of nativism and anti-immigration feeling, I guess. So the first and probably best known case of nativism becoming a huge issue in America was the Sacco Vanzetti case. So what happened was two people, it was unknown to us who they actually were charged for murder because they were supposedly robbing a store. Now, two Italian immigrants happened to be kind of passing by that store as it was being robbed, so people were assuming that because they were immigrants and near the site of the crime, that they would naturally be guilty. And they were later found to be anarchists, which is like people that are anti any government. So the public and the jury kind of both assumed, yes, absolutely, they're going to be guilty because, they're these filthy immigrants. So they were actually executed, and it was never found out whether or not they were really guilty. Even though they appealed for 6 years, it was kind of never really proven. Like the evidence was very fishy. Obviously, the second and more well-known example of nativism was that the KKK became popular again. They started selling this idea that they had to fight to save Americanism and our American culture. They stirred up a lot of, obviously, anti-immigrant feelings, anti-African American feelings. They even started going against Jews and Catholics as well. And Catholics was kind of a new thing for them because they considered Americans to be more Protestant. So they became a lot more popular in the 20s and started lynching even more, even though that the public was trying to stop lynching itself. Finally, the US government actually took steps to react to this as well. So it wasn't just these radical groups, it was also like the core of our American government that was doing this. They instituted the Emergency Quota Act and the National Origins Act, which basically limited any immigration to the United States to only 2% of the population of immigrants from that country that existed in 1890. So we're talking 30 years later, they're setting this cap before all of these people actually immigrated to there. So really, it was effectively cutting off immigration completely. The second topic I'm going to take you through kind of quickly is the idea that while all of this nativism stuff was happening and the economy was advancing because of all the new innovations and inventions we talked about, that led to a lot of cultural changes because people were in jobs that they used to not be in, and they were expanding kind of their view of what Americans really should should have in terms of personal freedom. And the biggest example of that was obviously women in the 20s. They did things that women had never really done on a large scale before, including things like wearing, dangerously shorter skirts and sleeveless tops, and they wore shorter hairstyles, like you can see in the picture there, and showed off their lower legs, things that women had never done in public before. They began to either marry much later or not at all. They started to get jobs they hadn't had before. They learned to drive cars. They went to college. They made advances in becoming doctors and lawyers and things like that women had never done before. So obviously is a huge shift in what the family dynamic really was. So women became, I guess, one of the names for women advancing in this cultural phenomenon, I guess, was the flapper. And you can kind of see an example in that picture that I have for you on the left as well. Another idea that started originating because of the cultural clash was actually on the other side. They were reacting to the fact that so many things were changing, and they were known as the fundamentalists. That means that they were kind of fearing this new morality and the new way of American tradition, and the changing family dynamics, and they wanted to protect traditional American values or fundamental American values, hence their name. They believed in the Bible as kind of absolute truth. If it was written in the Bible, it was, good as gold as in terms of truth. They rejected tons of ideas like women experiencing any sorts of new personal freedom, any new advances for any people who were not Caucasian, as well as ideas like evolution. So then you see an example like the Scopes trial. This man was actually tried and convicted in Tennessee, where a lot of fundamentalists lived, for teaching evolution in public schools, which we obviously now do all the time as the accepted scientific theory. So it's very interesting to see this shift throughout history, whereas it used to be a crime to teach evolution, and now it's kind of a crime not to. So you can kind of see like the cultural tensions and clashes there. So the other topic that kind of goes along with that, and we've talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to take a ton of your time, but prohibition obviously became a huge thing in the 20s and into the 30s. We had talked about how the 18th Amendment was passed and didn't allow the sale of alcohol or anything like that, but you can see examples like the picture on the right here is taken in a speakeasy. Obviously, these people are consuming alcohol while holding the no alcohol sign. That was pretty common. These secret bars were located all over the place. You could kind of have a password to get in, and it was like invite only. Or people started bootlegging. We talked about that as well. Like they actually started creating their own illegal alcohol in rural areas. But the thing that we didn't mention was the organized crime that started because of Prohibition. They basically ran their own black market for alcohol, and the biggest crime boss or organized crime boss was Al Capone. He's pictured to the right on the bottom there. He operated in Chicago, made tons of money off of bootlegging illegal liquor. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, or that could be one of your research topics. Kind of keep that in the back of your head. The next topic that I wanted to cover with you guys was the idea that so all this culture is changing and people are kind of expanding their idea of who they really are. And that really reflected a lot in the art and writing of the time. People started talking about like this bohemian culture. It's still a word we use today. It basically means non-traditional. This kind of popped up, especially like in urban areas like New York and Chicago, where there were a lot of people all living together. These writers and artists, they're basically challenging kind of the old way of life and looking at how the culture of the modern person actually is. So if you want to kind of read through, I talked a little bit about how they're influenced by the European artists. They started doing things like cubism, which is the picture on the bottom, just kind of distorting things, showing how modern life really was. I included the Great Gatsby version of the modern day to kind of show you what fashion was a little bit like. The Great Gatsby was also a famous novel written at the time, kind of talking about like the ills of modern living and criticizing those upper class people for being so superficial. Another topic that kind of goes directly along with that is the pop culture. So we talked about mass advertising and mass media with the radios in our last unit. Those kinds of things actually then brought the country together because everyone could hear the same news or see the same program at the same time and kind of bring those ideas and attitudes to everybody. So things like radio shows, music, movies, even. So the 1920s brought about the first talking movies and not silent movies. Sports shows, all of those things became, right at home. And people that were in sports before, yes, they were well known, but now they were like these superstar celebrities, just like those golden age Hollywood people that started in the late 20s in uh, our new talking films. So this is kind of the first age of the real American celebrity and music that everybody in the country knew and heard and saw all the time. And you could kind of see like national heroes come to life. Um, the other side of the coin is not only the new traditional American side of culture changing, but also culture changed a lot for African Americans. We talked about the Great Migration happening just prior to this time period because there were all sorts of new factory jobs available after World War One. So one of the things that ended up happening with African American culture was the Harlem Renaissance. So this is like a new African American traditional art, music, political movements. Obviously, it's located in New York City, which is where Harlem is, but it spread out to all of African Americans throughout the country. So just some famous writers and musicians. I'm sure you've heard of Louis Armstrong here. Bessie Smith is also pictured there. She's the kind of the first large scale female blues singer that was African American. Zora Neale Hurston, she was the first female Harlem Renaissance writer that actually featured an African American woman as the heroine of a story for the first time. Langston Hughes, he's another well-known guy. He was one of the writers that he wrote just tons and tons of articles, poems, everything that you can think of that showed what life was really like for African Americans at that time in the U.S. And then finally, Claude McKay, he was a guy that advocated for anti-lynching laws. So as far as politics went at that time, obviously African Americans were trying to gain more civil rights. So, I mean, the civil rights movement we talk about in the 60s, but it really began far before that. This was the era where the first African American man was elected to the House of Representatives in Illinois. His name was Oscar DePriest. So that was a huge breakthrough. The NAACP also kind of put out these pamphlets like you can see here, or reasons why people should join the cause. They actually were able to prevent things like corrupt Supreme Court justices being appointed. They were able to kind of fight against lynching laws and prevent a lot of hangings. And then there was also this Black nationalism movement that came out of the 20s as a result of these political movements. So this guy Marcus Garvey was kind of the leader of the movement. He really called for instilling traditional African American values back in to one's heritage and really owning that as their background, and became really popular with a lot of African Americans until he kind of took it a step further and went to this back to Africa movement. Like we should be separate from the white society. We shouldn't have to deal with this sort of segregation and things like that. And people really, some people caught on to it and they liked that idea, and some people actually did it. But it was not a wholly popular movement. So what really came out of that was the idea that African American culture, it was okay to be traditional and not try to blend in, and you could still find your place in society where you would belong. So that's kind of the end of our lesson here. I wanted to thank you guys for participating, and hopefully you learned a good deal. Hopefully you were able to pace yourself, and hopefully you enjoy the video lesson.